Hi there. Welcome to Crazy Greg's Jokes. Today I'm going to tell you a story, and the reason for this is that, first of all, when you tell jokes, you write your own jokes and things like this. Some people think, are you just laughing at everybody? But as I've chosen the name Crazy Greg, I've done a lot of crazy things in my life and not proud of all of them. And some of them I can laugh about. And I'm going to tell you a story today for two reasons. Number one, to see how crazy I sometimes have been. And number two, it's a story about things that most people don't encounter. It has to do with three generations of skunks. And the whole story I tell is true, and it begins with my grandfather, who unfortunately died when I was at the age of 2. But it must have been around the year 1929, something like this, when this all took place. My my grandfather, who came from Holland, married a woman who came from Germany at the time. It's part of Bohemia. At that time, at least, they spoke German. And they got married, and they lived in Kenosha, Wisconsin. That's where I was born. That's the town, unfortunately, where all the what should I say? All the problems that went on last fall before the election, where the buildings were burnt and all the shooting was done and stuff. But in any case, it was a very rural area at the time. And my grandfather had 3 daughters. One of them is my mother, and she had 2 older sisters. And there was a schoolhouse. It was very rural, as I said. There was a schoolhouse about a mile away. And apparently, my grandfather wasn't in a good mood that day, at least my mother said. He walked through his fields and went to the schoolhouse. This was a schoolhouse with one room where all the girls and boys were in one class together in different corners of the room. And after the parent teachers night, normally his wife had gone to, he walked home. And apparently he was in a bad mood, maybe because he had to do what his wife usually did, go to these teacher meetings, which are not always that interesting. In any case, as he was walking home, he walked through one of his fields with tall grass, and the story goes that he saw something white and black, thinking it was a newspaper in the tall grass. And he was in a bad mood, as I said, and he kicked it as hard as he could. It turned out to be a male skunk, or in any case, a mature skunk that just sprayed him full. He came down to the house, knocked on the door. His wife came out and couldn't believe what she smelled. Thinking for a minute, and got some hot water and soap and told him to take off his clothes behind the house and wash himself. He still smelled bad. So she remembered one thing, which is good, is something like tomato juice or something like that, which has a bit of acid in it, which can help to neutralize this. So she got some she got some canned tomatoes out in her jars, and he had to wash himself off with all these tomatoes. And after a while, he didn't smell bad anymore. But they washed his clothes 3 different times in very, very hot water, and each time they still stunk. And so they dug a hole and put his clothes in the hole. Now, that was the first generation. Now, my father, who was born in Albia, Iowa, is his son-in-law. And my father grew up with 7 other children on a farm in Iowa. And they used to love to go into the woods and find out where there was a den where skunks were born. So they would sometimes catch some younger ones and take them to a bar or something and let them go in the men's room and just get out of there as quickly as possible. Or sometimes they put some in some of these big mailboxes that are popular in the United States, especially in rural areas, in farm areas. And so sometimes a farmer might, I'm not saying the farmer himself, but the 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 post office guy would come and bring a letter or something and open the box, and he would be surprised by a skunk. They'd usually leave it open just a little bit so that the animal would get enough air. Another thing he did at that time was they would go along Lake Michigan Lake Michigan and sometimes the Mississippi, and would catch large snapping turtles. And they would take these also to like men's rooms in a bar and let them go. So you could imagine how surprised some of the people were when they went to the John, as we say in my area in Wisconsin. They were surprised. If you get one of those snapping turtles coming after you, you just disappear. In any case, that's what my father told me, but the most important thing he said was, remember that young skunks don't stink. Their gland is not developed. And secondly, if you ever encounter a skunk, even a male one, if you get its hind legs off the ground, it can't spray you. So I had all this to know, and it was 1978. I visited my good friend Dick Althaus, who lived in La Crosse, Wisconsin, and I visited him there. I had been living in Germany at the time, but came home for the summer to visit my parents and all, my friends. And he said, "Why don't we go swimming? It's right near the Mississippi," where he said we could swim. It was one of these kind of bays that come off a couple of kilometers or miles from the main flow. And there was a nice spot. We could swing out like Tarzan into the water, and we had a good time. And on the way back home, we were driving through an area which was like open land on the right, and on the left side it was more like trees, and it was kind of like the road went through some trees, and then it was open and came out again and all. And we came by and saw a young skunk on the road, and it was pulling at something. And he said, "Let's check that out." So he stopped the car, and I didn't always do what he told me to do, but that day I did it all, which just goes to show that I'm crazy a bit, at least. So in any case, he said, "Check it out." So I went back. The young skunk looked at me. It was trying to pull a dried rabbit, which had been crushed and baked by the sun. It was like beef jerky. Tried to pull it off the road. And I was standing next to him, and he looked at me, and it was like, I was here first. This is mine. So he kept pulling and pulling and pulling at it. And then I went back to the van. My friend was driving a van which had no windows in the back, and it had bucket seats, so he could walk between the driver and the guy sitting next to him through, and could walk around and come back. There were no seats back there. And so he said to me, "Well, take the towel that you brought." I had a brand new towel I brought from Germany. It was brown. That was probably good. In any case, he said, "Why don't you try to catch it?" And I said, "I don't want to get bit. Sometimes skunks have, you can get rabies from them." And he said, "Well, just take your towel and just grab his tail and pull him off." So, knowing what my father had said, keeping his hind legs off the ground, I thought, okay. I came from behind with the towel over my hand, grabbed his tail, and walked over to the car. And I said to my friend, "Well, what do you want to do with him now?" He said, "Just let him run around in the truck." I thought, okay. So I let him go, and he's running around back there, and we were still driving. And my friend says, "Well, where is it now?" And I said, "I don't know." He said, "Why don't you look?" So I got up and walked over back there, and I couldn't find it at first. But it was right above where the wheels are. There's part of the frame which comes out a little bit from the body of the car, and there's just a very, very thin spot, and this skunk had crawled into it. And nothing was hanging out of it except for his tail. And my friend said, well, what about the skunk? I said, well, he's there, but I can't get him. He said, well, you have to get him, otherwise he'll just stay in there. So I took my towel, grabbed the skunk's tail, and pulled and pulled and pulled. And I said to Dick, my friend, hey, if I pull any harder, I'll break his tail off. He said, get that thing out of there. So I pulled it as hard as I could, and as soon as it came out of the hole, oh, the whole car stunk like crazy. So I walked through the car up to the bucket seat, carrying this skunk in my hand, in the towel, not knowing what is going on outside. I just wanted to get rid of this thing. So the window was open, so I threw it out, and it flew maybe about 10 feet or so. And I look right in back of this area, maybe about 20 feet further. There were two families having a picnic. Both tables were full of people eating and looking towards us. They were all looking in this direction, and they see an idiot come by and throw a skunk out of the car. And then I opened the towel. Oh, I threw the towel out. And on the way home, we still had about 20 minutes to drive. We kept the two windows open. There were no other windows we could open. And we drove into the yard. His wife came out, and I was leaning over the edge of the window, the open window, kind of looking like this. And she comes up and smells and says, did you guys take a skunk with you? Well, yes, we did. So if that's not dumb enough to tell a joke, I don't know. But that's Greg as he lived and has lived. So 3 generations of skunks, and I turned out to be the one that my brothers and sisters always tell about. How dumb could you be? So take care.